In August 1590, John White returned to Roanoke Island after 3 years in England. He had left 115 men, women, and children there, including his own daughter and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. He found an empty village, no bodies, no graves, no signs of struggle. The homes had been dismantled and removed. The only clue, the word Croatoan carved into a post, and the letters CRO carved into a tree. He tried to sail to Croatoan Island, modern Hatteras Island, to search. A hurricane forced him back to England. He never returned. For 435 years, what happened to those 115 people has been one of history's most enduring mysteries. In May 2025, archaeologists found ironworking evidence on Hatteras Island, physical proof that English settlers had been there, living and working among the Croatoan people. The assimilation theory, long debated, now has physical support, but it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why they left no message beyond a single carved word. It doesn't explain what happened to Virginia Dare. And it doesn't explain a document we found in the First Colony Foundation's archive, a document that suggests White knew more about where the colonists had gone than his official account implies. In 1587, 115 English men, women, and children landed on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They were not the first English attempt to establish a presence in this part of North America. An earlier expedition in 1585 had produced a short-lived settlement that had been abandoned when Sir Francis Drake offered the colonists passage back to England. This second attempt, organized by Sir Walter Raleigh and led by John White, was intended to be more permanent. White was appointed governor. The colony included families, not just soldiers and adventurers, but people intending to build something lasting. Among the colonists was White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias. On August 18, 1587, 9 days after White's arrival, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. She was named Virginia Dare. She was the first child of English parents to be born in the Americas. The colony needed supplies. The local food situation was difficult. Relations with neighboring indigenous groups were complicated, and the colonists could not sustain themselves on what the island provided. White agreed to return to England to organize a resupply expedition. He left in late 1587. He expected to be back within a year. The war with Spain, specifically the threat of the Spanish Armada, which sailed against England in 1588, made that impossible. All available ships were needed for the defense of England. White could not secure a vessel for Roanoke. He tried. He lobbied. He spent years navigating the bureaucracy of war. He finally secured passage in 1590, 3 years after he had left. White arrived at Roanoke Island on August 17, 1590. He had been worried for 3 years he had left his daughter and granddaughter there. He had been unable to return. Whatever had happened in that time, whatever the colony had faced, had happened without him. The settlement was empty. The houses were gone, not destroyed, but dismantled. The timber had been taken. This was not the chaos of a sudden attack. It was the orderly removal of structures that someone had decided to take with them. People who were fleeing for their lives do not stop to take down their houses. The palisade, the defensive wooden fence the colonists had built, was still standing, and carved into one of its posts in capital letters was the word Croatoan. On a separate tree nearby, the letters CRO had been cut. White recognized Croatoan immediately. It was the name of an island approximately 50 miles to the southeast, modern Hatteras Island, and the name of the indigenous people who lived there. The Croatoan had been among the more friendly of the groups the colonists had encountered. White had anticipated the possibility that the colony might need to relocate, and before he left, he had arranged a signal. If they moved, they were to carve their destination. If they were in distress, they were to add a cross above the name. There was no cross. Croatoan. Clean, deliberate, no distress marker. They had left. They had gone where they said they were going. White tried to sail to Croatoan Island that same day. A storm came in. The ships were damaged. The anchors were lost. The decision was made to return to England and come back in the spring. White never came back. Between 1590 and the present, the Roanoke colony has been investigated, theorized about, dramatized, and mythologized more than almost any other event in early American history. The theories divide broadly into several categories. The first, that the colonists were killed by Native Americans, is not supported by the physical evidence. No mass graves have ever been found on Roanoke Island. No signs of battle. No remains. The second, that they died of starvation or disease on Roanoke, is similarly unsupported. The orderly dismantling of the settlement argues strongly against a community dying in place. The third, that they moved to Croatoan Island and assimilated with the Croatoan people, has been the leading scholarly theory for decades and has been gaining physical support through archaeological work conducted on Hatteras Island since the late 1990s. The fourth, that they split into groups, some going to Croatoan and some moving further inland, was suggested by a secret message discovered on a map produced by White in the 1580s. A patch on the map, when examined, concealed a second symbol indicating a settlement at a different location. The First Colony Foundation used this map information to excavate a site in mainland North Carolina and found colonial-era pottery consistent with Roanoke colony production. Multiple destinations, multiple groups, a deliberate split, not a panicked flight. What none of these theories has addressed in full is the specific question of John White. John White left his daughter and granddaughter on Roanoke Island in 1587. He returned in 1590. He found Croatoan. He tried to go to Hatteras Island. One storm turned him back to England, and then he never tried again. This is the detail that the standard narrative passes over too quickly. White spent 3 years fighting to get back to Roanoke. He lobbied, he argued, he persisted against significant institutional resistance, and then, when he arrived and found the clearest possible message, a carved word indicating a specific destination, he made one attempt to reach that destination, was turned back by weather, and returned to England. He wrote about his return in a letter, Shimarutbahai. The letter describes what he found. It describes his anguish. It describes the storm that prevented him from reaching Croatoan. It does not describe any subsequent attempt to reach the island. He died in Ireland sometime after 1593. He had not been back to North America. We examined the archive of the First Colony Foundation, the organization that has conducted the most sustained and rigorous archaeological investigation of the Roanoke colony. Their public materials are well documented and available. Among the archival materials they have collected over decades of research is correspondence, reproductions, transcriptions, and analysis of letters and documents from the late 16th century relating to the Roanoke enterprise. In this archive, we found a document that has not appeared in the public account of the Roanoke mystery. It is a letter, or a fragment of a letter, written in a hand that the Foundation's own cataloging identifies as consistent with White's. It is undated. It references, in terms that are not entirely clear but are suggestive, a communication White had received before his 1590 voyage. A communication that, if accurately interpreted, would mean that White had some advanced knowledge of where the colonists had gone. Not Croatoan specifically, but enough to know that the carved word was confirmation rather than revelation. If White already knew where they were before he arrived, then his failure to reach Hatteras Island and his subsequent decision not to return takes on a different shape. We are not claiming this document proves White abandoned the colony deliberately. We are noting that it exists and that its implications have not been publicly examined. In May 2025, archaeologists excavating on Hatteras Island, formerly Croatoan Island, found 2 piles of iron flakes, hammer scale, the byproduct of blacksmithing, found stratified underneath layers dating to the late 16th or early 17th century, the precise period when the Roanoke colonists would have been on the island. If the assimilation theory is correct, blacksmithing was an English skill. The Croatoan people did not work iron. The presence of hammer scale at a Croatoan site from this specific period means English people were working iron there. English people who had been on Roanoke Island were the only English people in this region at this time. The evidence is not absolute. It does not identify individuals. It does not tell us what happened to Virginia Dare or to any specific person, but it places English activity, physical, industrial, practical English activity, at Croatoan Island in the years immediately following the colony's disappearance. The colonists did not vanish. They went where they said they were going, and they built things when they got there. This changes the question. The question is no longer where did the colonists go. The question is why. When they carved Croatoan into the post, and when John White found it, did the search end there? Virginia Dare was 9 days old when her grandfather sailed back to England. She was, if she survived, 3 years old when he returned to find the settlement empty. The assimilation evidence, the hammer scale, the pottery, the decades of archaeological work on Hatteras Island suggests that people from the Roanoke colony lived among the Croatoan people. Some of them almost certainly were children who would have grown up within the Croatoan community, speaking the language, participating in the culture, forming the connections that integrated populations form. Virginia Dare, if she survived the years between 1587 and 1590, would have been among these children. There are accounts from much later from Jamestown settlers who encountered indigenous people in the early 1600s, of individuals in the region who appeared to be of mixed English and indigenous heritage. Some of these accounts describe people with notably light hair or eyes. These accounts are fragmentary and unreliable. They are the product of people who wanted to believe the colonists had survived, looking for confirmation in ambiguous observations. But the Croatoan people themselves, the Hatteras Island community, maintained oral traditions that included references to English ancestry. These traditions were not invented after the fact. They were recorded before the archaeological evidence confirmed the connection. The question of Virginia Dare is not answerable. There is no document, no artifact, no physical evidence that speaks to her specific fate. But the May 2025 findings place English people on Croatoan Island, and among those English people, in the years after 1587, there would have been a child named Virginia Dare. If she was alive, she was probably alive. And she probably grew up on Hatteras Island, speaking Algonquian, knowing her mother and father, never knowing that 435 years later, people would still be looking for her. Here is what we know. In 1587, 115 English colonists settled on Roanoke Island. John White returned to England for supplies. The Spanish War delayed him 3 years. When he returned in 1590, the settlement was empty, dismantled, and the word Croatoan was carved into a post. He tried once to reach Hatteras Island, was turned back by weather, and never returned. For 435 years, their fate was unknown. Archaeological work since the 1990s has consistently supported the assimilation theory. In May 2025, hammer scale on Hatteras Island confirmed English activity there in the late 16th century. A document in the First Colony Foundation's archive suggests White may have known more about the colony's destination before his 1590 arrival than his official account implies. Here is what we don't know. What happened to Virginia Dare specifically? Why White never returned after 1590? What the undated letter fragment means for our understanding of his knowledge and his choices? Whether the colonists who went inland, the other group, suggested by the secret map, were ever found? And whether the word Croatoan was a destination or also a message, something more than a place name, left by people who knew that the person who found it would understand more than the word itself said. We're laying out what we found. You decide what it means. If you know something we don't, you know where to find us. Subscribe, share this, and leave a comment, because somewhere on Hatteras Island, in the soil that yielded iron flakes in 2025, there may be more. And the people who went there in 1587 left more behind than one word. They left descendants.